In this video, we'll install the batter board and build and install the curved die wall.
The first thing I'll want to do though is build my die wall, this wall here, and a batter board to have a place to end my stair. We've got our batter board set up here now, just mocked up on a couple of 2x4s with about a 15-inch wide board that will bring our curved stair up to. The height of it should be exactly 49 inches, and it should be plumb. The face of your board should be plumb with your 45-degree line that you've marked on the ground. So you can check that with your level. Make sure that you're nice and plumb there and in line with the marks on your floor for the inside of the wall radius or the outside of your stair tread, and then also on the inside of the wall radius that you're stringing. So we're now ready to cut our die wall plates, our top and our bottom plate. So we'll demonstrate how to do that next. We have a long tramel arm that we're going to use with our router to cut a perfect inside and outside radius of our wall plate. The tramel you can just use. We'll have this template that you can mount up to the DeWalt router here. We also have some other router tramel setups as well. And what we want to do is we're going to put a nail through the tramel at some distance from our straight cutter of our router bit, and that will become the pivot point to act as the center of our tramel arm, or our compass, if you will, for the router. That pivot point needs to be at a specific distance from either the inside point of the router cutter or the outside point of the router cutter. And depending on if you're cutting an outside radius or an inside radius, we'll measure to one or the other. For an outside radius, where we want to cut on the outside of a piece of wood or a piece of plywood, we want to start our measurement so that our tape measure butts the inside of that router bit. For example, if we wanted a short outside radius, say 12 inches, we would put a nail or a pivot point at 12 inches from the inside of that router bit, and as we swing our tramel with our router bit attached, it would create an outside radius of that, or an outside cut of that radius. Opposite of that is an inside radius, which the router bit is now on the inside of the part, and we're cutting to the inside of that piece of plywood. So if we hook our tape to the outside of the router bit, and we want to have an inside radius at 12 inches, we would simply hook our tape on the far edge of that router bit, put our nail or our pivot point at the 12-inch mark, and that would be an inside radius 12-inch cut. For our wall plate, the dimensions that we're going to use are going to be a 90-inch inside radius. So for that, we'll hook our tape and measure 90 inches and establish our pivot point. And on the outside radius of our wall plate, we're going to add 3.5 inches. So our outside radius will be 93.5. We'll butt our tape to the inside and measure 93.5. I've already established those 2 points down here on the far end. And I have a couple nail holes, one at 93.5 to the outside of my mark, and then one at 90 inches to the inside of my mark. I'm going to take a nail, and I've cut the head off of my nail. This is just an 8-penny sinker. So I've cut the head, and I'm just going to pound my nail into a spot on the floor, like that. And I can simply slip my tramel point on top of my nail head, and by removing the head of my nail, I can slip it on and off and change positions, change the center point or the pivot point of my tramel fairly easily. I'll start by backing off my router bit so it's not dragging on the floor. And the first cut I want to make is going to be my outside radius, so we'll go by the far pivot point first. Okay, so my pivot point is right there. That's on the far end, so that is the outside radius. So we'll cut the outer edge of my plate first. And as you can see, it's just a gigantic compass now. So now all I need to do is put my blank piece of wood that I'll use to cut out my drywall plate. So we'll grab a piece of plywood and we'll get that positioned and we'll just tack that down. I've got my blank piece of plywood that I'm going to cut my plates out of positioned, and I've positioned it so that roughly the edge of the cutter is more or less centered on the edge of my board. As I set my router bit deeper and deeper, it'll generally just cut a little bit off of the peak, and as I come around, it will make that perfectly circular arch shape following the outside radius based off of my pivot point. So I'll come back. What I want to do though is I want to make sure that my blank board isn't moving as I cut my part. So I'm just going to tack it down with a couple of screws on either end. Since I'm cutting the outside radius first, I don't want to screw it up here because as I cut, the bottom part will eventually just come away. But if I tack it on the back side, as I cut, the fall off piece will fall away and I'll still have my keeper piece. So I'm tacked down, I have my far pivot point set on my nail, and I'm now ready to cut the outside cut of my curved wall plate. Right now the router bit, if you look at this, it's more or less flush with the bottom of my plate. I'm going to take about 1/4 of an inch at a time until I'm all the way through my piece of plywood. To do that, we'll have to loosen this and, in this case, spin counterclockwise just enough to get a little bit of material there. And we'll make one continuous pass all the way through. And then set it again the next depth and just keep going until this piece falls away.
Once I get to the far side, I'll drop my router bit another 1/4 of an inch and continue with another pass.
I've cut my outside radius and my outside piece is falling away, so now I'm going to shift my pivot point to the inside radius. I'm not doing anything, I'm not relocating my blanket at all, I'm just simply pulling my board up and finding my other pivot point. And we'll repeat the process for the inside radius. It's a good idea to just leave a paper thin thickness left on on your plywood and then finish the cut with a knife. And there's one of our curved wall plates. This is the same process as doing a laminated header for a barrel roof. It's similar, very similar concept. To cut our second one, we'll simply take our plywood now and we'll shift it over about 4 inches, and then we'll recut. And again, I'm going to relocate my pivot point to the far point. And use that to help position my plywood. If you look at the cut line here, you'll notice I kind of missed the edge on that end and I missed the edge on this end just a little bit. Again, if need be, you can just shift your board, your blank forward about 1/2 inch to compensate for that. In this case, since my plate is so short, I can work with what I've got, so I don't need to readjust. My plate length only needs to be about 6 feet long for our particular mock-up. Take our knife and just clean up that last little bit, the last 32nd of an inch. And then we'll shift our pivot point and cut the inside radius. be sure and pull your nail out when you're done. Take your wall plate, lay it down on your marks that you've laid out, and then we just want to mark the beginning and the end cuts, and then make a match set of top and bottom plates. Tack your two plates together like you would if you were doing a standard wall layout. And then we'll cut those two with we could either cut it with the jigsaw or skill saw. So we now have our wall layout, our top and our bottom plate. Now what we want to do is locate our studs. At the end, we'll put a stud on either side, on either end. And then, because of the way that our riser ledger attaches to our stud, we're going to offset our stud. So for instance, if this is our riser board, the face of our riser is to our line that we marked, our 7.5 incremental lines. We're going to take the thickness of our riser and our ledger, in this case a 2x4, and we're going to add that to this position here. We're going to offset this line by that thickness. And if you're using 3/4 inch material, that thickness will be 2 1/4 inches. So we'll offset that line by 2 1/4 to get the face of our stud. And then your riser ledger, as this gets installed, our stud will sit right behind it, and then will allow us to screw or attach our riser ledger to the face of our stud. Measure over 2 1/4 from our reference line. And we want to be roughly parallel to our line there. We'll make a mark and then just make an X on the far side of the line to indicate the side that our stud will go on. We'll also mark the edges. As I go along so that I can locate top and bottom. And I'll repeat that process for all of my intermediate studs. As you're marking your plate, we want to keep this back edge tight so that we're more or less square. You can see you can rock it because of that radius, but we want it to be tight at the very end. So we'll hold that there. And we should be ready to start assembling our die wall. We'll get our wall in place and we'll tack it down to the floor. couple braces on to make sure that it's plumb. All right, we're now ready to start installing our treads and risers.